I arrived at the American Anomalous Research Agency facility just as the sun was peeking over the Nevada desert. The concrete building stood out like a gray blemish against the sandy landscape. It was 5 stories of windowless walls, all surrounded by a chain-link fence topped with razor wire. Even after 3 years of working here, I still couldn't shake the feeling of how utterly unremarkable it looked from the outside. Just another forgettable government building in the middle of nowhere, designed to blend into the emptiness rather than stand out. My ID card buzzed me through the outer gate, and I parked at my usual spot near the eastern entrance. The morning air felt cool against my face as I grabbed my bag and headed toward the door. The facility housed fewer than 50 employees on a typical day, and many had already been reassigned in anticipation of our shutdown. My footsteps crunched on the gravel as I walked, my mind already racing with what the day might bring. Once inside, I navigated the familiar hallways toward the break room. The fluorescent lights hummed overhead, casting the same sterile glow they always had. Most of the offices I passed were already empty, cleared out by staff who'd moved on to other assignments. My own office remained partially packed, with cardboard boxes stacked beside my desk waiting for my final day. I pushed open the break room door and found Michael and Timothy already inside. Michael leaned against the counter, coffee mug in hand, while Timothy sat at the table reviewing something on his tablet. They both looked up when I entered. "Morning, Dave," Michael said, raising his mug in greeting. "Ready for another exciting day of wrapping things up?" I smiled despite my fatigue, as ready as I'd ever be. Timothy nodded at me without speaking, his eyes returning to his screen. That was typical for him, always observing, processing, thinking. I poured myself coffee from the pot Michael had already made and took a seat at the table. "You hear anything new about the shutdown?" I asked, directing the question to both of them. Michael shrugged. "Same as before. 2 more weeks, then this place gets mothballed. All the equipment's being shipped to other sites." "Nobody's saying where or why," Timothy added, looking up from his tablet. 3 years of research, and they're just ending it. The rumors have been circulating for weeks. First came the reassignment notices for junior staff, then the equipment inventories, and finally the official memo announcing the facility's closure. No explanation given, just a date when operations would cease and instructions for transitioning projects to other locations. Michael set his mug down harder than necessary. "You know what's crazy? After all this time, we still don't know what's on the lower levels." I knew immediately what he meant. Despite our security clearances, certain areas of the facility remained restricted, particularly the underground floors accessed by the elevator bank in the East Wing. None of us had ever been cleared to go below the main level. "The whole place is getting shut down, and they'll cart away whatever's down there without any of us ever knowing what we've been working next to," Michael continued, lowering his voice even though we were alone. "Doesn't that bother you guys?" Timothy closed his tablet case. "Of course it does. So let's find out," Michael said, his eyes bright with the reckless enthusiasm I'd come to expect from him. "Facility's closing anyway. What are they gonna do? Fire us twice?" I felt my stomach tighten. "You can't be serious." "Dead serious," Michael replied. "Look, we've got maintenance key cards that get us into most areas. And Tim here's got the memory of an elephant." "Tell him, Tim." Timothy glanced toward the door before responding. "I've seen Rodriguez enter the code for the restricted elevator. Watched him do it 3 times last week when I was fixing the network panel nearby." "You memorized it?" I asked, though I already knew the answer. Timothy's attention to detail was legendary among our colleagues. He nodded. It's a 6-digit sequence, not hard to remember. I took a sip of coffee to hide my unease. Breaking protocol went against everything I believed in. Yet, the opportunity to finally discover what lay beneath our feet after years of speculation was undeniably tempting. Most of the security staff will be gone after 6, Michael added. Skeleton crew on nights now with the shutdown. Perfect timing. This is crazy, I said, but my tone lacked conviction. So you're in? Michael asked, grinning. I should have said no. Every rational part of me knew that. But after 3 years of unanswered questions, of secrecy and compartmentalization, the chance to finally understand what our work had been supporting proved too compelling. Yeah, I said quietly. I'm in. Excellent, Michael replied, clapping his hands together. Let's meet at the East Elevator Bank at 6:15. Most of day shift will be gone by then. We spent the rest of our lunch break planning our approach. Timothy pulled up the facility blueprint on his tablet, the official version that showed only the main floor and administrative levels, nothing of what might exist below. Michael outlined what he knew about the security rotations, identifying the 20-minute window when camera monitoring would be at its minimum during shift change. I've got a maintenance key card from Ramirez in security, Michael explained. Told him I needed to check on some equipment in the server room after hours. Timothy volunteered to bring a flashlight and keep his phone charged for emergency contact. I agreed to be the lookout while they accessed the elevator controls. As our lunch break ended and we returned to our respective offices, I couldn't focus on my actual work. The quarterly reports I needed to complete remained untouched on my computer as I stared at the screen, my mind racing with possibilities about what we might find underground. Secret research, classified technologies, or simply storage space for sensitive materials. The hours dragged by with agonizing slowness. I moved papers around my desk, pretended to review documents, and answered a few emails. But my thoughts continuously returned to our planned expedition. Several times, I nearly convinced myself to back out, to text Michael, and tell him I'd changed my mind. But each time, my curiosity overrode my caution. By 5:30, I had given up any pretense of working. I shut down my computer and began organizing the last of my personal items into boxes. Through my office window, I watched the parking lot gradually empty as my colleagues left for the day. Cars pulled out one by one, their headlights cutting through the gathering dusk. Security staff changed shifts, the day team heading home while the night crew took their positions at reduced capacity. As the minute hand of the wall clock ticked closer to 6, my heart rate increased. I counted the remaining vehicles in the lot, mapping each one to the staff I knew would still be in the building. The facility grew quieter around me, the daytime bustle replaced by the hollow silence of a place winding down its existence. At 5 minutes before 6, I stood and put on my jacket, trying to appear casual in case anyone saw me. The weight of what we were about to do pressed down on me, but there was no turning back now. I watched the final minutes tick by on the clock, counting down to the moment we would finally discover what the American Anomalous Research Agency had been hiding beneath our feet all this time. I watched the second hand on my office wall clock make its final sweep to 6:15. My desk was covered with half-packed boxes, files scattered across the surface that I'd given up organizing hours ago. My palms felt clammy as I stood, checked the hallway, and headed toward the East Wing elevator bank. The facility had transformed in the hour since most staff had departed. Hallways that bustled with activity during business hours now stretched empty before me, my footsteps echoing against the polished tile floor. A strange stillness hung in the air, the kind that settles over places designed for people when those people are absent. I rounded the corner to find Michael already waiting at our meeting point, bouncing slightly on the balls of his feet. He grinned when he saw me, though the expression didn't quite reach his eyes. "There he is," he said, his voice too loud in the quiet hallway. "Thought you might have chickened out." "I said I'd be here," I replied, glancing around nervously. "Where's Tim?" Michael checked his watch. "Should be here." There he is. Timothy approached from the opposite direction, walking with measured steps that betrayed none of the anxiety I felt churning in my stomach. He carried a small backpack slung over one shoulder and nodded to us both in greeting. "Anybody still around?" he asked quietly. "Skeleton crew at the security desk," Michael answered. "Rodriguez and Shin. They're watching basketball on the monitor instead of the cameras." "You sure about that?" I asked. Michael shrugged. "Walked by there 5 minutes ago. Trust me, they don't care what's happening in this wing right now." Timothy unzipped his backpack and pulled out a small tactical flashlight. "Brought this. My phone's fully charged too." "Great," Michael said, producing a white key card from his pocket. "Got this from Ramirez yesterday. Maintenance access. Should work with the code Tim memorized." We stood before the elevator doors, hesitating. Unlike the other elevators in the building, this one had no floor indicator above it, just a small keycard reader and numeric keypad mounted on the wall beside it. "I'll keep watch," I said, positioning myself where I could see down both hallways. "Hurry up." Michael swiped the keycard through the reader. A small light changed from red to green, and the keypad illuminated with a soft blue glow. "Your turn, Michael," I whispered to Timothy. Timothy stepped forward, his fingers hovering over the keypad for a moment before he began entering the sequence, 6 digits pressed with absolute certainty. I held my breath as he finished, half expecting alarms to blare. Instead, the elevator doors slid open with a soft chime that made all 3 of us jump. Inside was a standard elevator car, but the button panel caught my attention immediately. Instead of numbers marking the floors, there were letters B, C, and D. "We're on the main level now," Timothy whispered. "Must be. So D is the lowest," Michael said, stepping inside. "That's where we're going." I hesitated, one foot still in the hallway. The sight of those letter-marked buttons made everything suddenly real. We were about to breach security protocols that had been drilled into us since our first day. If caught, we'd lose our jobs instantly, possibly face criminal charges. Yet the mystery of what lay below pulled at me like gravity. "Dave, come on," Michael urged. "Now or never." I stepped inside. Timothy pressed E. The doors closed, and the elevator began its descent. The ride took much longer than I expected. The standard elevators in the facility travel between floors in seconds, but this one kept descending well past what seemed normal. None of us spoke as the car hummed downward, the only indication of our journey a barely perceptible vibration beneath our feet. After nearly a minute, Michael broke the silence. "Anyone think we'll find alien bodies down here? Maybe some crashed UFOs the government's been hiding?" His attempt at humor fell flat in the confined space, his laughter sounding strained and artificial. "For super soldiers," he continued, shifting his weight nervously. "Genetic experiments, 2-headed dogs, standard government black project stuff." Timothy kept his eyes fixed on where a floor indicator would normally be, though this elevator had none. "We've been descending for over a minute," he observed quietly. "We must be at least 5 stories below ground by now." "Deeper than the building plans ever showed," I added, calculating in my head. No wonder this section's restricted. The elevator slowed, then came to a stop with a slight jolt. For a moment, nothing happened. I wondered if we needed another code to exit or if perhaps the system had detected unauthorized access. Then the door slid open, revealing what lay beyond. A long corridor stretched before us, disappearing into shadow beyond the reach of the weak ceiling lights spaced too far apart. The walls were smooth concrete, unadorned by the motivational posters and bulletin boards that lined the upper floors. The air that rushed into the elevator felt noticeably colder, carrying a stale quality that reminded me of sealed rooms unopened for long periods. "Holy shit," Michael whispered. "We actually made it." But as I took my first step into that hallway, something about the place struck me as fundamentally wrong. Nothing I could specifically identify. No visible threat or obvious danger, just an instinctive feeling that settled over me like a weight. The rational part of my brain attributed it to the breach of protocol, to being somewhere unauthorized, but deeper instincts suggested something else entirely. "We shouldn't be here," I said, the words escaping before I could stop them. "Bit late for that," Michael replied, already several steps ahead. "Come on. We've got maybe 40 minutes before someone might notice we're down here." Timothy clicked on his flashlight, sweeping the beam along the concrete floor ahead of us. "The air handling's different down here," he noted. "Separate system from the main building, I think." We moved forward together, our footsteps echoing in the unnatural quiet. With each step, that sense of wrongness grew stronger, a pressure building behind my eyes. Yet curiosity drove me forward alongside my friends into the darkness that waited ahead. The corridor stretched before us like the throat of some massive creature, swallowing what little light we had into the darkness. I took a tentative step forward, my shoes making a hollow sound against the polished concrete. The walls on either side were bare and gray, nothing like the practical yet somewhat personalized environment of the upper floors. "This hallway is wider than the ones upstairs," I whispered, my voice bouncing off the hard surfaces despite my attempt to keep quiet. Michael nodded, sweeping his phone's light across the ceiling and walls. Government efficiency at its finest. Spend millions on a secret underground level, but can't afford decent lighting. Timothy pulled the tactical flashlight from his backpack, clicking it on. The beam was significantly stronger than our phone lights, cutting through the darkness with impressive clarity. "Let's save the battery on this for when we really need it," Timothy said, keeping his voice low. "Our phones should work for now, and we'll have this as backup." I noticed doors positioned along both sides of the corridor at irregular intervals, some close together, others spaced 20 or 30 feet apart. Unlike the labeled doors upstairs with their department designations and room numbers, these were completely unmarked, just blank metal surfaces with simple handles. Timothy approached the nearest door and tried the handle. It didn't budge. "Locked," he said, moving to the next one. He tried that handle, too, with the same result. "This one, too." Michael joined him, testing another door across the hallway. "Same here. Figures they wouldn't leave anything interesting easily accessible." We continued down the corridor, our footsteps creating an unsettling rhythm in the silence. The air felt dense and stale, as if it hadn't circulated properly in months. I checked my watch. We'd been underground for about 5 minutes, but it felt much longer. "How big is this place?" I asked, mostly to myself. "Way bigger than any official blueprint ever showed," Timothy replied, his voice tight with concentration as he tested yet another locked door. The corridor seemed to go on forever. We walked for several minutes, passing door after identical door. I tried to imagine what might be behind them. Offices, storage, something worse. My imagination conjured images that made my skin crawl, and I pushed those thoughts away. Got a junction up ahead. Michael called from the front of our group, his flashlight illuminating where the corridor split into 3 separate paths. We approached the intersection, each of us pointing our lights down a different hallway. 3 identical passages stretched into darkness, indistinguishable from one another. "Great," I muttered. "Which way?" Michael looked at his watch. "We got about 40 minutes before someone might start wondering where we are. Let's split up, cover more ground, meet back at the elevator in 30 minutes, regardless of what we find." I immediately felt a knot form in my stomach. Is that smart? Splitting up? "We've got our phones," Timothy said, holding his up. "Signal seems okay down here, surprisingly. If anyone finds anything interesting or runs into trouble, just text." I wanted to argue but couldn't think of a logical reason why we shouldn't separate. We had limited time, and staying together meant exploring only 1/3 of what was available to us. "Fine," I reluctantly agreed. 30 minutes back at the elevator by 6:45. Michael nodded, already eyeing the right passage. "I'll take this one." "I'll go straight," Timothy said, adjusting his glasses as he peered down the middle corridor. "Guess that leaves left for me," I said, pointing my phone's light down the leftmost passage. It curved slightly, preventing me from seeing more than about 50 feet ahead. "See you guys in 30, Michael said, already moving toward his chosen path. "Don't get lost." Timothy gave me a small nod before heading down the center corridor, leaving me alone at the junction. I took a deep breath and started walking down my assigned path. The left corridor curved gradually downward, creating the impression that I was descending deeper underground with each step. The doors continued along both walls, still unmarked, still locked when I tried a few handles. After walking for maybe 5 minutes, I became aware of a sound. At first, it was so faint I thought I might be imagining it, a sort of hissing or rushing noise that I attributed to ventilation systems. I paused, listening more carefully. The sound didn't have the mechanical consistency of air handling equipment. It ebbed and flowed like voices. I resumed walking, trying to convince myself it was just the building settling or water in pipes, but the sound grew more distinct as I continued. I stopped again, this time deliberately holding my breath to eliminate any noise I might be making. There it was, unmistakable now, whispers, multiple voices speaking in hushed tones, seemingly coming from within the walls themselves. "Hello," I called out, immediately regretting breaking the silence. My voice echoed down the corridor, but the whispers continued, unaffected by my call. I approached the nearest wall and pressed my ear against it. The cold concrete sent a chill through me, but the voices became clearer. Some phrases sounded like English, though I couldn't make out specific words. Others had the rhythms and tones of different languages, Spanish, maybe Russian, and others I couldn't identify. Pulling back from the wall, I continued walking, my heart beating faster now. The whispers grew louder with each step, as if the sources were moving closer or becoming more numerous. I checked my phone. I still had signal, but something kept me from texting Michael or Timothy. What would I even say? That I was hearing voices in the walls? They'd think I was losing it. I tried another door handle, partly to reassure myself that I was still in the real world where physical objects behave as expected. The handle turned slightly before stopping, locked like all the others. But as I touched it, the whispers surged, becoming almost frantic for a moment before settling back into their previous rhythm. The The corridor continued its gentle downward slope, curving slightly to the right now. I checked my watch again. I've been walking for about 15 minutes. I should turn back soon to make our meeting time. Just as I was about to turn around, I noticed something different about the next door. Unlike the others, this one had a small rectangular window at eye level. I approached cautiously, the whispers growing more insistent as I neared it. I raised my phone, shining the light through the window while keeping my face a few inches back, some instinct warning me not to get too close. The beam cut through the darkness beyond, revealing a room much larger than I expected. I could see only a portion of it, rows of what looked like beds, tables. The angle made it hard to tell. I leaned slightly closer, trying to get a better view. The whispers suddenly spiked in volume, becoming almost a shout. I jerked back from the door, my heart hammering in my chest. The voices weren't coming from behind the doors. They really were in the walls themselves, all around me. And now I could understand some of the English phrases. Asterisk, get out. Leave now. Not safe. Asterisk, a wave of cold dread washed over me. My earlier curiosity vanished, replaced by a primal need to escape. Something about this place was deeply wrong. The whispers weren't products of my imagination. They were warnings. I turned and began walking back the way I'd come, moving faster than before. The voices followed me, seeming to pace alongside me within the walls. Some grew louder, others faded, as if I was passing by different speakers. The effect was disorienting, making the corridor seem to shift and waver in my phone's light. As I rounded the curve that would take me back to the junction, I realized I was practically running. The confidence I'd felt when we first entered the underground level had evaporated, replaced by an overwhelming certainty that we needed to leave this place immediately. The whispers continued, unintelligible, yet somehow conveying urgency. I needed to find Michael and Timothy. We needed to get back to the elevator. We needed to get out. I backed away from the door window, my feet stumbling over each other as the whispers pressed in from all sides. The warnings echoed through the walls. Asterisk, leave now. Get out. Not safe. Asterisk, fragmenting my thoughts with their urgency. Something pulled me forward despite every instinct, screaming to turn back. I had about 15 minutes before I needed to meet Michael and Timothy at the elevator. 15 minutes to discover what lay beyond that door. I tried the handle, expecting resistance like the others we'd encountered. To my surprise, it turned completely in my grip. Unlike the other doors that required key cards or access codes, this one seemed to have a malfunctioning lock. The security light above the keypad glowed red, but the mechanism had clearly failed. The heavy metal door swung open with surprising ease, releasing a rush of even colder air that washed over me. I stood frozen in the doorway, my phone's light cutting a weak path into darkness so absolute it seemed to swallow the beam. The whispers stopped. The sudden silence hit me like physical pressure against my eardrums. I took a tentative step forward, then another. The room extended far beyond what I'd glimpsed through the window. My light revealed only patches of the space, too small to comprehend its true size. I moved further in, sweeping my phone from side to side. The floor changed from concrete to smooth tile that clicked under my shoes. The echo suggested an enormous open space. I kept walking, trying to make sense of the shapes emerging at the edge of my light. Then my beam caught something. A face. I jumped back, nearly dropping my phone. The face didn't move. I steadied myself and aimed the light directly at it. A man stared back at me with open, unblinking eyes. He wore what looked like a modern, An American military uniform, his posture stiff and ramrod straight, but he wasn't standing. He was somehow suspended, floating inches above a platform. I shifted my light to the left. Another figure, and then another. Row after row of them stretched beyond the reach of my light. "Hello," I called out, my voice sounding small and insignificant in the vast space. No one replied. No one even stirred. I forced myself to move closer to the nearest figure. The man's skin had an unnatural, waxy pallor. His eyes were clouded over, locked in a perpetual vacant stare. I recognized his uniform as standard issue U.S. Army, fairly recent. His name tag read Collins. I waved my hand in front of his face. Nothing, not even a blink. As I swept my light across the room, it revealed more details. These weren't living people. They were preserved. Perfectly preserved bodies arranged in precise rows. Hundreds of them, maybe even thousands. I walked down the aisle between two rows, my feet moving almost without my conscious command. Each body was dressed in a different uniform. Some I recognized as American military uniforms from various eras. Others wore what looked like German Wehrmacht uniforms from World War II. Still others were wearing uniforms I couldn't identify, perhaps from foreign countries or time periods I didn't recognize. They all shared the same blank stare, the same eerie stillness, without a hint of decay. They could have been standing there for days or decades. I couldn't tell. "What is this place?" I whispered to myself, the sound of my own voice startling in the oppressive silence. As if triggered by my question, the whispers returned. Louder now, more frantic. They surrounded me completely, pressing in from every direction. Asterisk leave now. Get out. Danger. Asterisk these weren't just English voices anymore. I heard what sounded like German, Russian, languages I couldn't even place, all conveying the same urgent warning. I turned in a slow circle, my light revealing row upon row of these preserved soldiers extending to the limits of the enormous chamber. They all wore their uniforms with meticulous precision, as if they had been dressed for inspection. Some had visible wounds, bullet holes, slash marks, burns. Yet their expressions remained the same, that same vacant stare. My foot bumped against something on the floor. I pointed my light down and saw a small metal plate embedded in the tile. Numbers were etched into its surface, 1951, 1953. I moved forward and found another plate, 1939, 1945. Each section had dates, war dates. These were soldiers from wars throughout history, collected and preserved like specimens. But why and by whom? I kept walking, unable to tear myself away despite the growing chorus of whispers begging me to leave. The chamber seemed to grow larger the further I went, revealing more and more rows of preserved bodies. Then I saw something that made me freeze. A section at the far end of the room held platforms with no bodies on them. Empty spaces waiting. The plates embedded in the floor in front of these empty platforms read 2022. The date had no end, just a dash extending into the future. That's when I noticed a door at the far end of the chamber. Unlike the metal door I'd entered through, this one was made of glass. Through it, I could make out what looked like medical equipment, tables with straps, machines I didn't recognize, drains in the floor. The whispers rose to a deafening roar. Asterisk run now before they come. Asterisk my hand was shaking so badly I almost dropped my phone. The beam of light danced wildly across the faces of the preserved soldiers, making them seem to move to watch me. I backed away, then turned and broke into a run. My footsteps echoed through the massive chamber as I raced back toward the entrance, the whispers crescendoing around me. I burst through the metal door into the corridor, pulling it shut behind me with a heavy clang. The whispers continued, driving me forward. I ran back the way I'd come, following the gently curving corridor, my breathing quick and shallow. The walls seemed to press inward, the ceiling lower than before. The whispers followed me, urging me to move faster. I rounded the curve that would take me back to the junction, my mind filled with images of those perfectly preserved bodies staring into nothingness with their cloudy eyes. I needed to find Michael and Timothy. We needed to get out of this place. Whatever the American Anomalous Research Agency had been researching, it wasn't worth our lives. I ran faster, the corridor stretching endlessly before me as I desperately searched for the junction that would lead me back to my friends and the elevator that promised escape from this underground nightmare. I ran through the corridor, my lungs burning with each desperate breath. The walls pressed in around me, carrying those awful whispers that seemed to chase me like physical entities. My phone's flashlight bounced wildly as I sprinted, casting monstrous shadows that danced across the concrete. The junction appeared ahead, the three-way split where we'd separated earlier. I slowed down, trying to catch my breath as I approached the meeting point. The central corridor stretched before me, and I spotted a figure standing motionless in the middle of the pathway. Michael. I called out, my voice cracking. He didn't respond. As I got closer, I saw Michael standing completely still, his arms hanging limply at his sides, his phone's flashlight pointed at the floor, creating a pool of light around his feet. His face was blank, eyes wide, staring at nothing. Michael, I said again, moving directly in front of him. We need to go now. He didn't seem to hear me. His lips moved slightly, forming words I couldn't make out. I leaned closer, straining to understand. The soldiers, marching over and over. He mumbled, his voice barely audible. The children won't stop crying, begging for help. A chill ran through me. What had he seen? Michael. I grabbed his shoulders and shook him, trying to break whatever hold this place had on him. Look at me. His eyes remained unfocused, looking through me rather than at me. Demons in the walls, he continued, his body starting to shake under my grip. Monsters waiting. They're coming for more. I shook him harder, panic rising in my chest. Snap out of it. We need to find Timothy and get out of here. At the mention of Timothy's name, Michael's eyes seemed to clear slightly. He blinked several times, his gaze finally focusing on my face. Dave, he asked, his voice small and uncertain. Yes, it's me. We need to go. Where's Timothy? Michael's face crumpled, tears welling in his eyes. I don't know. I was walking down the hallway, checking doors, and then I heard voices, children crying. He stopped, his whole body shaking now. What did you see? I asked, though part of me didn't want to know. Children, he whispered. Dozens of them, not moving, just standing there like they were frozen. Some were old clothes, like from black and white photos I've seen. Others had modern clothes, all of them staring with these empty eyes. He swallowed hard, and the worst part, empty spaces. Empty spaces with little platforms waiting for more children. My stomach turned as I remembered the room I'd found, the soldiers, the empty platforms with dates extending into the future. I saw something similar, I told him. Military personnel, preserved somehow from different time periods. Michael nodded frantically. Yes, exactly. Like like some kind of collection. Who would do this? What is this place? I don't know, but we need to find Timothy and get out, I said, looking down the third corridor, the one Timothy had taken. How long have you been standing here? Michael looked confused. I don't know. I was in that room, and then I don't remember how I got back here. I checked my watch. We've only got about 10 minutes before we're supposed to meet at the elevator. Have you seen any sign of Timothy? Michael shook his head. No, nothing. Timothy, I shouted down the leftmost corridor. My voice bounced back at me, hollow and distorted. The whispers in the walls surged in response, becoming almost frantic. I couldn't make out words anymore, just a cacophony of urgent, panicked sounds. Timothy, Michael joined me, calling into the darkness again. The whispers rose in volume, almost drowning out our voices. Let's check his corridor, I suggested, heading toward the passage Timothy had taken. We moved quickly down the straight hallway, our combined phone lights creating a stronger beam that cut through the darkness. The whispers followed us, seeming to slide through the walls alongside our progress. Timothy, we called together. No response except the ever-present whispers. We continued down the hallway for several minutes, checking door handles as we went. All locked. No sign of Timothy. We need to go back, Michael said suddenly, grabbing my arm. We need to get out of here. But Timothy, listen to me. Michael's eyes were wild with fear. The voices, they're telling me things, horrible things about what happens to people who stay too long. We need to leave now. We can't just abandon him, I argued, though my own fear was screaming at me to run. If we stay, we'll end up like them, Michael insisted. Like those preserved people. The voices are warning us. They're trying to help us escape. I hesitated, torn between loyalty to Timothy and the overwhelming dread that filled this place. 5 more minutes, I decided. We searched for 5 more minutes, then head back to the elevator. If he doesn't show up, we'll get help from security. Michael nodded, though he didn't look convinced. 5 minutes. That's it. We resumed our search, moving faster now, calling Timothy's name with increasing urgency. The whispers seemed to rise and fall with our calls, almost as if responding to us. Why are they doing this? Michael asked between shouts. Why preserve people like that? I don't know, I admitted. But whatever it is, it's been going on for decades, maybe longer. We reached the end of Timothy's corridor, finding nothing but another junction leading to more hallways. No sign of our friend. Time's up, Michael said, checking his watch. We need to go. I took one last look down the branching corridors, guilt washing over me. Timothy, I called one final time as loud as I could. The whispers surged to a deafening level, and I swore I heard a clear voice among them. Go now. Let's go, I said, turning back toward the main junction. We jogged back the way we'd come, our footsteps echoing in the cold, stale air. When we reached the original junction, we turned toward the elevator corridor without discussion. The need to escape had become overwhelming, pushing aside all other concerns. As we neared the elevator, Michael suddenly grabbed my arm again. What if Timothy found his way back already? What if he's waiting for us upstairs? I hadn't considered that possibility. Maybe. Let's hope so. We reached the elevator, the metal doors looking like the most beautiful thing I'd ever seen. Michael jabbed the call button repeatedly, as if that would make it arrive faster. Come on, he muttered. The whispers grew louder around us, more insistent. I pressed my hands against my ears, trying to block them out. The elevator chimed softly, and the doors slid open. We practically fell inside, Michael immediately hitting the A button for the main floor. As the doors began to close, I caught a glimpse of movement at the far end of the corridor, a shadow shifting in the darkness. "Wait," I said, putting my hand out to stop the doors. "I think I saw something. It might be Timothy." Michael slapped my hand away, hitting the closed door button repeatedly. "No, no way. We're leaving now." The door slid shut, cutting off my view of the corridor. The elevator began its ascent, and I felt a momentary weightlessness as we started our journey back to the surface. What if that was him? I asked, anger mixing with my fear. "It wasn't," Michael said firmly, his face pale and drawn. "Trust me, it wasn't Timothy." We rode in silence after that, the elevator humming around us as it carried us upward. The whispers faded with each floor we passed, until all I could hear was our ragged breathing and the mechanical sounds of the elevator. What had we done? What had we seen? And most importantly, what had happened to Timothy? The elevator continued its ascent, taking us away from the preserved bodies, the whispers in the walls, and our missing friend. I couldn't shake the feeling that we were leaving more than just Timothy behind in those dark corridors. We were leaving answers to questions I wasn't sure I wanted to ask anymore. The elevator doors opened, and the harsh fluorescent lights of the main floor hit us like a physical blow. After so long in the darkness below, the ordinary office lighting seemed as bright as stadium floodlights. My eyes watered as I stumbled forward, legs weak and unsteady. "We made it," I gasped, leaning against the wall to keep from falling. My hands pressed against the cool surface, confirming it was real, normal, not like the walls below that carried whispers. Michael didn't respond. He doubled over and lurched toward a nearby trash can, retching violently. The sound of his vomiting filled the quiet hallway as his body rejected what his mind had experienced. I wanted to help him, but couldn't make my legs move yet. I blinked rapidly, trying to adjust to the light and regain my composure. The familiar hallway, with its beige walls and generic office carpet, looked so mundane, so impossibly normal after what we'd seen underground. It felt like we'd crossed from a nightmare into reality, except the nightmare had been real. "Timothy," I said suddenly, remembering our friend. "We need to call him." My hand shook as I pulled out my phone. The signal showed full bars up here, unlike the strange connectivity we'd had below. I dialed Timothy's number, listening to it ring. Voicemail. Straight to voicemail. "Timothy, it's Dave. Call me the second you get this. We're back on the main floor by the elevator. Michael's with me. We need to know you're okay." I hung up and tried again immediately. Same result. Michael wiped his mouth with the back of his hand and straightened up, his face ashen. "Any answer?" I shook my head. "Voicemail. Try again," he urged, his voice still hoarse from vomiting. I did, with the same result. "Timothy, please call back. We're worried about you. We're waiting by the elevator on the main floor." We stood there staring at the elevator doors as if willing them to open and reveal our missing friend. Minutes passed in tense silence, broken only by my repeated calls to Timothy's phone. What if he's still down there? With those things? Michael asked, sliding down the wall until he sat on the floor, knees pulled up to his chest. "They weren't things," I said. "They were people, preserved somehow. Like specimens," Michael whispered. "A collection." I checked my watch. "We've been waiting 10 minutes already. We need to give him more time. Maybe he found another way up." Michael shook his head. There is no other way up. The blueprints. The blueprints didn't show the underground levels either, I reminded him. We lapsed into silence again. I kept trying Timothy's phone every few minutes, but it continued going straight to voicemail. The elevator remained motionless, its digital display showing it was still on our floor. After nearly 20 minutes of waiting, Michael began to rock back and forth, his arms wrapped around his knees. The children wouldn't stop crying, he said, his voice barely audible. Behind the glass, they looked so perfect, like dolls, but their eyes knew what had happened to them. I didn't want to hear this. I didn't want to think about what we'd seen down there. Some wore clothes from the 40s, 50s, he continued, staring at nothing. Little boys in short pants and suspenders. Girls in pinafore dresses. But others had modern clothes. T-shirts with cartoon characters I recognized. One had light-up sneakers. Dave, light-up sneakers. Michael, stop, I said, my stomach churning. He didn't seem to hear me. They were arranged by height. By height, Dave. Who would do that? Who would take children and preserve them like that? And the voices from the walls. They begged me to help them. They said they'd been waiting so long. I slid down the wall to sit beside him, needing the support. The soldiers I saw were arranged by war. By time period, World War II, Korea, Vietnam, I said. I swallowed hard. And empty spaces with dates going into the future. Michael nodded frantically. Yes. The children's room had empty platforms too. Like they're expecting more, planning for more. Who's doing this? What is this place, really? I asked, knowing he didn't have answers. We should never have come down here, Michael said, tears streaming down his face. Now the voices warned us. They told us to get out. I checked my watch again. 25 minutes had passed since we'd returned to the main floor. I stood up on shaky legs and pressed the elevator call button, watching the doors open on an empty car. I'm going back down, I announced suddenly, surprising myself. Michael looked up at me in horror. No. Are you crazy? We barely got out of there. Timothy is still down there, I said. We can't just leave him. He could be anywhere in those tunnels by now, Michael argued. Or he could be... He couldn't finish the sentence. I knew he was right. The maze of corridors seemed endless, and we had no way of knowing which way Timothy had gone. But abandoning him felt wrong, cowardly. I stepped back from the elevator, letting the doors close. Maybe you're right. Michael pulled himself to his feet, still unsteady. We need to get help. Real help. Security, I agreed. We'll tell them Timothy is missing. What about everything else we saw? Michael asked. I hadn't thought that far ahead. I don't know, but Timothy's safety comes first. We waited another 20 minutes, continuing to try Timothy's phone without success. Each minute that passed made it less likely he would suddenly appear. It's been 45 minutes, I said finally. We need to report this. Michael nodded, his eyes red and swollen. What are we going to tell them? The truth, I said. That we went exploring where we shouldn't have, got separated, and now Timothy is missing. They'll fire us, Michael said. Maybe worse. I don't care, I replied. If there's even a small chance they can help Timothy. We walked slowly down the corridor toward the security station, my mind racing through what I would say. I needed to emphasize that Timothy might be in danger, that finding him was more important than punishing us for breaking rules. I'd admit to using the maintenance key card and the code, take full responsibility if needed. I rehearsed the words in my head as we approached the guard desk at the main entrance. Two security guards sat behind monitors, one watching what looked like a basketball game on a small screen. They looked up as we approached, their expressions changing from boredom to alertness as they took in our disheveled appearance. "We need help," I said, my heart pounding in my chest. "Our friend is missing." The guards exchanged a look I couldn't interpret, and I realized this moment would determine whether we got the help we desperately needed or faced consequences I couldn't begin to imagine. The older one, whose name badge read Patterson J., set down his coffee mug and turned to face us fully. "Missing?" he asked, his voice flat and professional. "Who's missing?" "Timothy Clark," I said. "He's one of our colleagues." We were down in the restricted area, and we got separated. We can't find him." I expected shock or anger about our unauthorized access, but Patterson's expression didn't change. He nodded slightly, as if we told him the coffee machine was broken. "When did you last see him?" Patterson asked, pulling a notepad from his desk drawer. About an hour ago," I said, "at the junction where the corridors split into 3 paths. He took the middle one." Michael stepped forward, his face still pale and sweaty. "You don't understand. And there's something wrong down there. We saw things, horrible things. People preserved like specimens. Children and soldiers just standing there, not moving, not breathing, with these empty eyes." Patterson cut him off with a raised hand. "I need to focus on locating your missing colleague. Those other matters are above your clearance level." "Not, I don't know what you're talking about, or you must be mistaken." He knew exactly what we'd seen. "You know about the rooms?" I asked. "The preserved people." Patterson's face remained perfectly composed. "I need your employee ID cards, please." Michael and I looked at each other, then slowly pulled out our cards and handed them over. Patterson examined them, wrote down our information, and passed them to the younger guard. "Chen, call it in," Patterson said. "Code Wayward." 2 returnees, 1 outstanding. Code Wayward, returnees outstanding. They had terminology for this situation. This had happened before. The younger guard picked up a phone and dialed a number from memory. "Security desk, main floor. We have a Code Wayward situation. 2 returnees present, 1 outstanding. ID numbers." He read our employee numbers from the cards. "Yes, sir." "Understood." My mouth went dry. "What's happening? Are you sending people to look for Timothy?" Patterson leaned back in his chair, studying us with detached interest. "Appropriate measures will be taken." "How are you both feeling? Any nausea? Headaches? Auditory hallucinations?" "The voices," Michael whispered. "You know about the voices in the walls." Patterson didn't confirm or deny, just made a note on his pad. "When did the voices start? Could you understand what they were saying?" "They were warnings," I said, "telling us to leave, to get out while we could." Patterson nodded as if I had confirmed something he already knew. "And the missing employee, Timothy Clark, did he report hearing these voices as well?" "I don't know," I admitted. "We got separated before." I trailed off, realizing how little I actually knew about what had happened to Timothy. "Please take a seat." Patterson gestured to a row of chairs along the wall. "Someone will be here shortly to assist you." "Assist us?" Michael's voice rose. "We don't need assistance. Timothy needs help. He's still down there with those things." Patterson's expression didn't change. "Sir, please lower your voice and take a seat." We sat down, though every instinct told me to keep arguing, to demand action. The calm, procedural way they handled our panic was almost as disturbing as what we'd seen underground. Michael leaned toward me, whispering, "They know, Dave. They know about all of it." I nodded, watching as Patterson made more notes and Chen continued monitoring the security screens, occasionally glancing our way. Neither seemed concerned or surprised by our story. "Do you think Timothy is okay?" Michael asked quietly. Before I could answer, the main entrance doors opened. Two men in dark suits walked in, moving with purpose. They didn't look like regular security or office staff. Their posture was too rigid, their expressions too controlled. Patterson stood up as they approached. "The returnees are here, sir." The taller of the two men nodded. "We'll take it from here." I found myself standing, although I didn't recall making the conscious decision to do so. "What about Timothy? Are you sending people to find him?" The man turned to me, his face an unreadable mask. "Mr. Martinez, correct?" I nodded, a little unnerved that he knew my name without having to ask. "I'm Agent Collins. This is my colleague, Agent Ramirez. We'd like you to come with us, please." "Where?" Michael demanded, also standing. "Just to the conference room," Collins said smoothly. "We need to debrief you about tonight's events." "What about Timothy?" I repeated, my anxiety growing. "The team has already been dispatched," Ramirez said. His voice had a practiced, almost robotic quality, as if he'd recited those exact words countless times before. "Your cooperation will help us locate your colleague more efficiently." I didn't entirely believe him, but I didn't see that we had much of a choice. We followed the agents down the hallway toward the main conference room, the same one where we'd held our quarterly meetings for the past 3 years. Inside, the lights were already on. 2 folders sat on the table, each bearing a name, mine and Michael's. The agents gestured for us to sit, then took up positions across from us. "What time did you enter the restricted area?" Collins asked, dispensing with any pleasantries. "Around 6:15, I said. "But shouldn't you be focusing on finding Timothy instead of questioning us?" Collins ignored my question. "And you separated at the junction approximately 10 minutes later." "Yes," Michael said. "I took the right corridor, Timothy took the middle, and Dave took the left." "And what did you see in your respective corridors?" Ramirez asked, opening a laptop. Michael glanced at me, then back at the agents. "I found a room with children. They were preserved somehow, standing upright, not moving, from different time periods. Some looked like they were from the 40s or 50s. Others were modern, and there were empty platforms like they were waiting for more children." I expected some sign of disbelief, or at least surprise, but Ramirez simply typed Michael's statement into his laptop. "And you, Mr. Martinez?" Collins turned his attention to me. I swallowed hard, my throat suddenly dry. A similar room, but with soldiers, military personnel from different wars, different countries, also preserved, also with empty platforms labeled with future dates. More typing. Still no reaction. The voices, Michael blurted out. "What are they? Why are they in the walls?" Collins and Ramirez exchanged a brief, almost imperceptible look. "That information is classified," Collins said flatly. "Now, did either of you enter any other rooms or interact with any of the preserved specimens?" "They're not specimens," I said sharply, my voice rising. "They're people. Dead people who've been preserved like museum displays. Who's doing this? What is this facility really for?" Collins looked at me, with something that bordered on pity. Mr. Martinez, the American Anomalous Research Agency deals with matters beyond standard classification. The less you know, the better for your psychological well-being. Our psychological well-being? Michael laughed, a high, thin, almost hysterical sound. I saw children, preserved children with empty spaces, waiting for more. And you're worried about our psychological well-being. Ramirez closed his laptop with a snap. We understand this has been traumatic. That's precisely why protocols exist for these situations. Protocols. They had procedures for this. This had happened before. How many others? I asked suddenly, the question bursting out of me. How many other employees have found their way downstairs? Neither agent answered, but their silence spoke volumes. What happened to them? I pressed, needing to know the truth, no matter how grim. Colin sighed, the sound heavy with resignation, and reached into his jacket. He pulled out 2 envelopes and slid them across the table. Your employment with the American Anomalous Research Agency is terminated, effective immediately. These letters contain the details of your severance packages, which are quite generous considering the circumstances. I stare at the envelopes, a cold dread washing over me. They've been prepared in advance. They had expected this to happen. What about Timothy? Michael asked, his voice breaking, the word barely a whisper. Mr. Clark's situation will be handled according to established protocols, Ramirez said, his voice devoid of any emotion. What does that mean? I demanded, the fear for Timothy tightening its grip on my chest. It means you should focus on your own futures, Collins said, his tone brooking no argument. 2 SUVs are waiting outside to take you home. You'll find all personal items from your offices have been packed and will be delivered to your residences tomorrow. That's it. Case closed. Move along. Michael stood up abruptly, his chair scraping loudly against the floor. Timothy is missing. We've seen things no one should see, and you're just sending us home with termination letters? Mr. Torres, Collins said, his voice cooling perceptibly. I should remind you that your employment contract included extremely strict confidentiality clauses. Discussing anything you've seen tonight with anyone, including each other, after you leave this facility constitutes a serious federal offense punishable by up to 20 years imprisonment. You're threatening us, I said, my voice tight with anger. I'm reminding you of legal obligations you already agreed to, Collins corrected, his expression unreadable. Now, shall we proceed to the exit? We were given no choice. Collins and Ramirez escorted us through the hallways toward the main entrance. The building felt different now, alien and menacing. Not just a workplace with some restricted areas, but something inherently wrong, something deeply disturbing. How had I spent 3 years here without sensing what lay beneath the surface? At the security desk, Patterson handed us visitor badges to replace our employee IDs. Turn these into the drivers when you reach your destinations. Jerry, I said, reading his full name from his badge. You know what's down there. How do you work here knowing that? Jerry Patterson looked at me with empty eyes that reminded me too much of the preserved bodies. Good evening, sir. Please proceed to the vehicles. Outside, 2 black SUVs idled in the parking lot, engines running. A man in a suit stood by each one. Mr. Torres, the vehicle on the left, Collins directed. Mr. Martinez, the one on the right, you're separating us? Michael asked, suddenly looking panicked. Standard procedure, Ramirez said smoothly. The drivers will take you directly to your homes. Michael grabbed my arm, his grip tight. Dave, what about Timothy? We can't just leave him. I didn't know what to say. What could we do against an organization that had clearly handled this situation countless times before? Mr. Torres, please proceed to your vehicle, Collins said, his tone hardening. Michael's grip on my arm tightened. Dave, the voices. They knew. They tried to warn us. I know, I said quietly, trying to reassure him. Michael, we'll talk tomorrow, okay? We'll figure this out. He nodded reluctantly and let go of my arm. We walked toward our separate vehicles. As I reached mine, I looked back at the facility, that bland concrete building that concealed horrors I couldn't even begin to comprehend. The driver opened the door for me. Sir. I hesitated, thinking of Timothy still somewhere in those underground corridors. Would he end up like those preserved bodies? Was that what happened to people who stayed too long, who knew too much? As I slid into the back seat, I caught a final glimpse of Michael getting into the other SUV. His face was turned toward the facility, his expression lost and broken. The door closed beside me with a heavy thunk. The driver got in and pulled away without a word. In the side mirror, I watched the American Anomalous Research Agency facility grow smaller and smaller until it disappeared completely into the Nevada darkness, taking Timothy and its secrets with it. I didn't sleep a wink. The SUV had dropped me off at my apartment complex shortly after midnight, the driver uttering nothing more than, "We've arrived, sir," before I stepped out into the cold, empty parking lot. I spent the rest of the night sitting at my kitchen table, jumping at every creak in the walls, every rustle outside the window. My mind kept replaying those horrific images of the soldiers, preserved like museum exhibits, and the whispers that seemed to follow me even into my home, taunting me with their secrets. Morning sunlight now streamed through my blinds, falling across the stark white envelope sitting on my table. I'd opened it hours ago, reading and rereading the termination letter inside, trying to make sense of it all. The language was cold, corporate, and precise. Employment terminated effective immediately. Security violation. Confidentiality breach. Severance package equivalent to 6 months' salary. No mention of Timothy. No acknowledgement of what we'd seen down there. Just cold, impersonal corporate language carefully disguising something monstrous. My phone buzzed for the third time since 6 a.m. Michael again. I picked up, my heart pounding in my chest. Dave, you there? His voice sounded thin, stretched to the breaking point. Yeah, I'm here, I said, rubbing my eyes, trying to shake off the lingering fog of the night. Did you sleep at all? How could I sleep? Michael laughed, a hollow, haunted sound that was nothing like his usual easy humor. Every time I close my eyes, I see those children standing there, staring at nothing. And the voices. Can you still hear them? I asked, my voice barely a whisper. No, I lied, wanting to protect him, wanting to believe it myself. The truth was, I kept thinking I heard whispers coming from my bathroom pipes, from the vents, from the walls themselves. But admitting that would only make Michael worse, send him further down the rabbit hole. I can, he said, his voice barely audible. They're quieter up here, but they're still talking, saying things, asking me to come back. I gripped the phone tighter, my knuckles white. That's just the stress, Mike. It's not real. It can't be. It was real down there, he countered, his voice rising. You heard them too. I couldn't argue with that. Have you heard anything about Timothy? Any calls or texts? Nothing. Michael's voice cracked, the sound like shattering glass. Dave, what if he's become one of them? What if they took him and preserved him like the others? The image hit me like a physical blow, stealing my breath. Timothy standing motionless with clouded eyes, another specimen in that horrific collection, trapped for eternity. I pushed the thought away with all my might. I'm going to try calling his family, I said, trying to sound optimistic, trying to cling to some semblance of hope. His sister lives in Phoenix. He mentioned her once. Okay, call me back, he pleaded. I need to know he's all right. I hung up and pulled my laptop toward me, logging into the employee portal we used at work. My credentials still functioned surprisingly, but when I searched for Timothy Clark in the directory, I found nothing. His profile had been completely removed, as if he'd never worked there, as if he'd never existed. I tried human resources where emergency contact information would be stored. My access had been revoked for that section. Every trace of Timothy had been systematically erased overnight. My phone buzzed again. Michael. Any luck? He asked immediately, his voice tight with anxiety. No, they've already scrubbed him from the system. It's like he never existed. Michael went quiet for a moment, the silence heavy with unspoken fear. I'm coming over, he said finally, his voice strained. I can't stay here alone. The walls keep talking. Okay, I agreed, worried sick about his mental state. Do you need me to pick you up? No. I'll drive. I'll be there soon. After he hung up, I tried to put my apartment in order to create some semblance of normalcy in the face of the encroaching madness. Empty coffee mugs littered the counters from my sleepless night. The blinds were still drawn, giving the place a shuttered, hidden feeling, as if I were trying to protect myself from something lurking outside. I pulled them open, letting the sunlight flood the living room, chasing away the shadows. Henderson spread out below my third-floor apartment, a picture of suburban tranquility. Normal people going about normal lives, completely unaware of the secret underground chambers filled with preserved bodies and the walls that whispered warnings to those who dared to venture too deep. By noon, a knock came at my door. Michael stood in the hallway, a bottle of whiskey clutched in one hand and a backpack slung over his shoulder. He looked terrible, a complete wreck, his hair unwashed, his eyes bloodshot, his stubble darkening his normally clean-shaven face. He'd changed clothes at least, but his shirt was buttoned incorrectly, further adding to his disheveled appearance. You look like hell, I said, stepping aside to let him in. Feel worse, he muttered, walking straight to my kitchen and placing the whiskey on the counter with a heavy thud. Got any glasses? I checked my watch, the gesture almost automatic. It's barely noon, Mike. He stared at me, challenging me, daring me to judge him. I sighed inwardly and pulled 2 tumblers from the cabinet. He'd drink with or without me, and I desperately wanted to keep him talking, to keep him from completely losing himself. Michael poured generous amounts into both glasses, pushing one toward me before taking a long, desperate swallow from his own. He winced as it went down, the liquor burning its way down his throat. So, what's your theory? He asked, leaning heavily against the counter, his eyes bloodshot and unfocused. Government experiments gone wrong. Alien technology? Some kind of preservation technique we've never even heard of? I took a small sip of whiskey, feeling it burn its way down my throat. I didn't know what to believe anymore. I don't know. Those bodies, some of them looked decades old, but they weren't decaying. They were perfectly preserved. The children's room had kids from at least the 40s, Michael said, staring blankly into his glass, lost in the horrific memories. I recognized some of the clothing styles, but others wore modern clothes, like they'd been collecting them for generations, carefully curating this macabre exhibit. The soldiers were organized by war, I added, the details still vivid in my mind. World War II, Korea, Vietnam, but also more recent conflicts and uniforms from different countries too, not just American. It was systematic. Michael took another long drink, emptying his glass. Who would do this and why? What's the point of preserving dead people like that? It's us sick. Are we even sure they were dead? I asked, the question that had been haunting me all night finally escaping my lips. Michael looked up sharply, his eyes widening slightly. What do you mean? I mean, they weren't breathing, weren't moving, but something felt wrong. Different from just seeing a corpse. Something off. They were standing upright, Michael said slowly, as trying to process the implications of my words. No support system visible. No rigor mortis. Perfect preservation. Impossible. We fell silent, both contemplating implications that were too horrible to voice, too terrifying to fully grasp. In the voices, I finally said, breaking the silence, the words heavy with dread. Where were they coming from? Why could we hear them? Michael finished his drink and immediately poured another, his hand shaking slightly. They warned us, told us to leave, like they were trying to help us. But why? But who were they? I asked, desperately seeking some kind of explanation, some kind of logic in this sea of madness. Former employees? Previous specimens? What are we dealing with here? Michael shuddered, a visible tremor running through his body. Last night, I had dreams, nightmares. I was standing in that room with the children, but I couldn't move, couldn't speak, could only watch as people in white coats examined me, took notes, poked and prodded. But I was aware, completely aware. He looked up at me, his eyes wide with fear, his voice barely a whisper. What if they're all still aware in there, Dave? What if they can see and think but can't move or speak? What if that's what happened to Timothy? I felt a chill run down my spine, despite the warm temperature in the apartment. The thought of Timothy trapped in that state, conscious but unable to act, was almost unbearable. We don't know that, I said, trying to sound more confident than I felt. He could have found another way out. He could be hiding somewhere. You don't believe that, Michael said flatly, his eyes filled with a mixture of fear and despair. You saw how those agents reacted. This has happened before. They have protocols. This wasn't the first time someone stumbled upon their secret. I walked to my living room window, looking out at the quiet suburban street below. Everything seemed so normal, so ordinary, and yet beneath the surface of that normalcy, something truly horrifying was taking place. We should call the police, I said, my voice barely audible. Report Timothy missing. Maybe they can investigate. Michael laughed bitterly, the sound devoid of any humor. And tell them what? That our friend disappeared in a secret underground government facility filled with preserved bodies? That wall's talk to me. Yeah, that would go over real well. They'd lock us both up in a psych ward. We don't have to mention the bodies, I argued, clinging to the idea that we could somehow navigate this nightmare. Just that he went missing at work. Maybe they'll look into it. Did you miss the part where they threatened us with 20 years in federal prison? Michael asked, his voice rising. They've already erased him from the employee database. They've covered their tracks. We have nothing, Dave. I knew he was right, but the feeling of helplessness was almost crushing. I turned back to find Michael pulling a laptop from his backpack. I've been researching the American Anomalous Research Agency all morning, he said, his voice tight with determination, opening the computer on my coffee table. There's almost nothing. He showed me the search results, a few vague government contract listings, budget allocations buried in obscure federal reports. Nothing about a Nevada facility or any specific research aims. It's like they barely exist on paper, I said, scrolling through the meager findings, a growing sense of dread washing over me. Or they've scrubbed their presence, Michael countered, his fingers flying across the keyboard. Look at this. He pulled up a Department of Energy budget report from 2 years ago that listed the ARRA as receiving substantial funding for specialized containment research. The following year's report had no mention of the agency at all. They're hiding in plain sight, Michael said, his voice filled with frustration. Black budget operations disguised as boring research initiatives. That's how they get away with it. We spent the next several hours combing through every resource we could access, desperately searching for any clue, any piece of information that could shed light on what we'd seen. Public records, government databases, scientific journals. Their array appeared occasionally in bureaucratic documents, but with no substantive information about their activities, nothing that would explain the horrors we'd witnessed. As evening approached, Michael's drinking increased, and his theories became more elaborate, more desperate. The preserved bodies were failed experiments. They were alien technology. They were souls trapped by government weapons. Each explanation sounded more outlandish than the last, more like a desperate attempt to make sense of something that was inherently incomprehensible. I ordered pizza, forcing Michael to eat something besides whiskey. He picked at a slice while continuing his increasingly frantic search for answers, his eyes darting around the room, as if he expected someone to burst through the door at any moment. Dave, he said suddenly, his voice tight with fear, his eyes wide with paranoia. What if they come for us next? What do you mean? I asked, my heart pounding in my chest. We saw things we weren't supposed to see. We know too much. They can't let us walk around knowing what's down there. What if they decide we're a liability? What if they decide we need to be silenced? His hands were shaking slightly, his voice barely a whisper. They let us go. I reminded him, trying to reassure him, trying to reassure myself. Gave us severance packages. They want us to be quiet, that's all. To keep us quiet, he insisted, his eyes fixed on some unseen threat. But what if they're watching us? What if they're listening right now? What if they're just waiting for us to make a mistake? I glanced around my apartment involuntarily, suddenly feeling exposed, vulnerable. The thought that we were being monitored, that our every move was being scrutinized, was terrifying. I think if they wanted us gone, we'd be gone already, I said, trying to project an air of confidence that I didn't feel. They had plenty of opportunities. Michael leaned forward, lowering his voice even further, his eyes gleaming with a feverish intensity. Or preserved. Standing in those rooms with the others, another specimen in their collection, trapped for eternity. I put down my pizza, my appetite completely gone. Mike, you need to get some sleep. You're spiraling. This is getting out of control. I told you I can't sleep, he said, his voice rising, his agitation growing. He stood up, pacing my small living room, his movements jerky and erratic. Every time I close my eyes, I hear them. The voices from the walls. They're calling me back, Dave. They want me to come back. They need my help. I moved to him, putting my hands on his shoulders, trying to ground him, to bring him back to reality. Listen to me, Mike. You're exhausted and traumatized. We both are. But those voices aren't here. They were only in the facility. They're not real. Michael looked at me, his eyes unfocused, his gaze distant. You don't hear them now. Whispering, warning, telling you to come back. No, I lied again, the words sticking in my throat. The truth was, I had heard what sounded like distant murmuring all night, but admitting that would only feed his paranoia, drive him further into the abyss. And neither do you. It's just memory playing tricks on you. You're just exhausted. He pulled away from me, running his hands through his unwashed hair, his eyes filled with a mixture of fear and confusion. What about Timothy? Are we just going to abandon him? Are we just going to pretend this didn't happen? We don't have a choice, I said, the words tasting bitter on my tongue. We can't go back to the facility. We can't tell anyone what we saw. We can't report him missing without exposing ourselves. We're trapped, Mike. So we do nothing. Michael's voice rose, his anger and frustration bubbling to the surface. We just let them get away with it. We just pretend like our friend didn't disappear into some secret government torture chamber. What else can we do? I asked, my voice filled with frustration and helplessness. You saw how prepared they were. The protocols, the termination letters, the clean exit. We're not the first ones to discover what's down there, Mike, and they've clearly perfected handling people like us. Michael collapsed onto my couch, the fight draining out of him, his body slumping with exhaustion and despair. So that's it. We just live with this. We just pretend like everything is normal, like our lives haven't been completely shattered. I sat beside him, the weight of our situation settling over us both like a suffocating blanket. For now, I said quietly, trying to offer some small measure of hope. For now, we just try to survive. And then we figure something else out. We have to. But as darkness fell outside my apartment windows, I realized the terrible truth, the devastating reality of our situation. We were completely on our own. Timothy was beyond our help. No one would believe our story. And somewhere in the Nevada desert, the American Anomalous Research Agency continued its work, collecting and preserving its specimens, while the voices in the walls whispered warnings to those who dared to venture too deep, to those who stumbled upon the secrets that were never meant to be known. Michael crashed on my couch that night, finally passing out from exhaustion and whiskey around 3 o'clock in the morning. I covered him with a blanket and went to my bedroom, but sleep wouldn't come. I kept hearing noises in my walls, water pipes expanding, air conditioning cycling on and off, but my mind transformed every sound into those underground whispers, those haunting voices from the depths of the facility. The next morning, Michael looked even worse than before. The few hours of unconsciousness hadn't refreshed him. Dark circles hung under his bloodshot eyes, and he moved like a man twice his age, his body heavy with exhaustion and despair. I need to go home, he mumbled, gathering his laptop and stuffing it into his backpack. Need to do more research. Need to figure this out. You should stay, I said, my voice filled with concern. We can look into this together. We can support each other. He shook his head, his eyes unfocused. Can't think straight here. Need my own space. Need to be alone with. He trailed off, his gaze fixed on some unseen point in the distance. I walked him to the door, worried sick about his ability to drive, about his rapidly deteriorating mental state. Call me when you get home, I said, my voice pleading. Okay? Just so I know you made it safe. Yeah, sure, he muttered, his hand on the doorknob. I'll call. He paused in the doorway, turning back to face me, his eyes filled with a desperate plea. Dave, do you really not hear them anymore? The voices? Are you sure you're not just pretending? I hesitated, my heart pounding in my chest. The truth was, I'd heard what sounded like distant murmuring all night, but admitting that would only feed his paranoia, push him further over the edge. No, I lied, the word like a stone in my stomach. Just regular apartment noises. Old building. You know how it is. He studied my face for a moment, his gaze searching, questioning. Lucky you, he said finally, a hint of envy in his voice. And then he was gone, disappearing into the hallway. That was Monday. By Tuesday afternoon, I grew increasingly concerned when Michael hadn't returned my calls. I'd left several messages, but he hadn't responded. I drove to his apartment complex, my anxiety building with every mile, and knocked on his door for nearly 5 minutes before he finally answered, his movements slow and unsteady. The smell hit me first, a wave of stale, oppressive odors that made me gag. Unwashed bodies, stale alcohol, and something else, something sour and wrong, something that spoke of neglect and decay. Michael stood in the doorway wearing the same clothes from yesterday, now even more rumpled and stained, his face pale and gaunt. "What do you want?" he asked, his words slightly slurred, his eyes unfocused. "Checking on you," I said, my voice strained with concern. I didn't wait for an invitation, but pushed past him into the apartment, my heart pounding in my chest. "You weren't answering your phone." I was worried. His living room had transformed overnight, descending into a state of utter chaos. Printouts covered every surface, like a bizarre, obsessive collage. His coffee table, couch, even taped to the walls. News articles, research papers, government documents, and conspiracy theory blog posts. Many had sections highlighted or circled in red marker, with Michael's scribbled notes crammed into the margins, a desperate attempt to connect the dots, to make sense of the madness. "Been busy," he said, closing the door behind me, cutting off the flow of fresh air. "Found some stuff. You wouldn't believe." I picked up the nearest paper, a declassified document about MKUltra from the 1970s, the infamous CIA mind control program. Another nearby was a printout about consciousness transfer experiments supposedly conducted in the 1980s, wild theories about transferring the human mind into computers. "Mike, have you slept at all?" I asked, my voice rising in alarm. He ignored my question, grabbing a stack of papers from the couch and thrusting them toward me. "Look at this. Similar facilities all over the country, hidden underground, black-budget projects. They're everywhere, Dave. This is bigger than we thought." I scanned the papers, my stomach churning. Most came from conspiracy websites with questionable sourcing, unreliable sources, wild claims. A few appear to be legitimate government documents about research facilities, but nothing directly connected to what we'd seen, nothing that would confirm his increasingly outlandish theories. "You need to eat something," I said, my voice firm, my concern growing. I noticed an empty whiskey bottle lying on its side on the kitchen counter, another sign of his spiraling decline. "Let me make you a sandwich or order some food. You haven't eaten anything in days." "Not hungry," he muttered, shuffling through more papers, his movements jerky and frantic. "The voices get louder when I eat. They don't like it. They say it interferes with the connection." A chill ran through me, a wave of cold dread washing over my body. "Mike, the voices aren't real. They can't be here. They're in your head. You need help." He looked up sharply, his eyes wild and unfocused. "Then how do they know things? How do they tell me about the other facilities? About the collection program? About Operation After Image? How could I know that if they weren't real?" "What collection program?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper, afraid of what I might hear. He pulled a crumpled piece of paper from his pocket, his hand shaking uncontrollably. Operation After Image. Started in 1945. Preservation of human specimens for long-term observation. Capturing souls. The paper was a photocopy of what looked like an official document, but the header and most identifying information had been redacted with thick black bars, carefully obscuring any identifying marks. "Where did you get this?" I asked, my voice tight with fear. "Dark web," he said, his voice barely audible. "Found a forum. People who worked at places like ours, they know. They share information. They're trying to expose the truth." I put the paper down, my hands trembling. "You need help, Mike. Professional help. You need to talk to a doctor, a therapist. You're not thinking straight." He laughed bitterly, the sound hollow and empty. What would I tell them? That I found preserved bodies in a secret government facility? That walls talk to me? That I'm receiving messages from beyond the grave? They'd lock me up and throw away the key. They'd diagnose me with some kind of psychosis and pump me full of drugs. I'd be worse than the people down there. "You don't have to tell them everything," I argued, trying to reason with him, trying to break through his paranoia. "Just say you're having trouble sleeping, that you're hearing things, that you're feeling anxious. They don't need to know the details." "They wouldn't believe me," he interrupted, his voice rising, his agitation growing. "No one would accept you. You were there. You saw it too." I spent hours trying to convince him to eat something, to take a shower, to get some rest, to seek professional help. He reluctantly agreed to eat half a sandwich I made, but refused to stop his research, his obsession with uncovering the truth consuming him completely. I left that evening only after extracting a promise that he'd call me if things got worse, a promise that I knew he probably wouldn't keep. Wednesday followed the same pattern. I visited Michael's apartment to find more printouts, more wild theories, more evidence of his declining state, his descent into madness. He'd started writing on the walls directly, covering them with dates, names, locations, creating a web of information that made sense only to him, a desperate attempt to impose order on the chaos that was consuming him. I brought groceries and cooked a simple meal, watching with growing alarm as he picked at it while explaining his latest theory that the American Anomalous Research Agency was capturing the souls or consciousness of the dead and preserving them in artificial bodies, trapping them for eternity. "That's why they can talk through the walls," he said, his eyes fever bright, his voice barely a whisper. "They're not fully contained. Parts of them leak out. They're trapped, Dave, and they're desperate to escape." Thursday was worse. Michael had stopped answering his door completely, his isolation growing, his grip on reality weakening. I used the spare key he'd given me years ago, my heart pounding with a mixture of fear and dread, and let myself into the apartment. Inside, I found him sitting on the floor surrounded by papers, unwashed and unshaven, his eyes glazed over, muttering incoherently to himself. The apartment was dark and stale, the air thick with the stench of unwashed laundry and stale alcohol. "They want me to come back," he said when he finally noticed me, his voice barely a whisper. "They keep saying they need help. They're trapped. They can't get out. I need to help them." I helped him into the shower, stripping off his filthy clothes and turning on the water, the hot spray a small act of kindness in the face of so much despair. While he was cleaning up, I gathered the most disturbing of his wall notes and printouts, the ones that seemed to be feeding his delusions, and hid them in a kitchen cabinet, hoping to deprive him of the fuel for his paranoia. He needed less information, not more. He needed help. "You should stay with me again," I suggested, trying to sound casual, trying to avoid alarming him. "You shouldn't be alone right now. It's not safe." He emerged looking marginally more human now, having changed into clean clothes. "Can't," he said. "Need to keep working. I'm almost there. Almost figured it out." "Figured what out?" "How to help them." "The voices? They're trapped. They've been trapped for years." I tried a different tack. "Mike, what about Timothy? Shouldn't we be focusing on what happened to him?" Michael's face just crumpled. "Timothy is one of them now. I hear him sometimes at night. His voice is different, but I know it's him." That night, I called a mental health crisis line, explaining the situation as vaguely as I possibly could. The counselor suggested bringing Michael in for an emergency psychiatric evaluation, but warned that they might hold him for observation if he mentioned hearing voices. Given what we knew about government agencies and their keen interest in keeping us quiet, I was terrified about what might happen if Michael started rambling about preserved bodies and underground facilities while he was institutionalized. Friday morning, I woke up to a text from Michael. "Sorry for everything. Never should have dragged you down there." Something about the specific wording set off major alarm bells in my head. I called him immediately, but it went straight to voicemail. I tried 3 more times while throwing on some clothes and grabbing my car keys. The drive to Michael's apartment took 20 minutes in the morning traffic. Each minute felt like it stretched out to an hour. I kept calling his phone and kept getting voicemail. I tried desperately to tell myself he was just sleeping, that his phone was dead, anything to come up with any explanation other than the one that was growing more and more certain with each unanswered call. I parked haphazardly in the lot and ran to his building, taking the stairs 2 at a time all the way to the 3rd floor. His door was locked. I pounded on it, calling his name, drawing curious glances from a neighbor who quickly retreated back inside their apartment. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely manage to get the spare key in the lock. The door swung open, revealing an apartment in even worse disarray than before. Papers were everywhere, along with empty bottles and food containers, but no Michael to be found in the living room or kitchen. "Mike," I called, moving toward the bedroom. "You here? Answer me, man." The bedroom door stood partially open. I pushed it wider, taking in a rumpled bed, clothes scattered across the floor, and more papers taped to the walls. The closet door was closed. I knew, even before I opened it. Some part of me knew exactly what I was going to find. He had used his belt, or a sturdy leather one I recognized, looped over the closet rod. Michael's face was discolored, his eyes open, but unseeing. It wasn't like the vacant stare of the preserved bodies, but somehow it was even worse because it felt so undeniably final. My legs just gave out. I collapsed to the floor, pulling my phone from my pocket with completely numb fingers. I dialed 911, giving the operator the address in a voice that didn't even sound like my own. On the dresser, a single sheet of paper stood propped against a lamp. 7 words written in Michael's increasingly erratic handwriting. "Can't stop the voices. They want me." The next few hours passed in a blur. Paramedics confirmed what I already knew. The police asked questions that I answered mechanically. Had he seemed depressed? Yes. Had he threatened suicide? Not explicitly. Did he have a history of mental illness? Not that I knew of. They showed minimal interest in the note. Depression, they concluded, probably exacerbated by alcohol. They asked about family members to notify, and I provided what little information I had about Michael's estranged sister in Phoenix. Nobody asked about our jobs or why we had both suddenly been terminated. Nobody questioned the strange research materials plastered all over the apartment. To them, it was just another sad case, another statistic. A detective took my statement in Michael's living room, while body removal specialists worked in the bedroom. He asked if I wanted grief counseling resources. I nodded, without really even hearing him. "There's nothing you could have done," he said, handing me a card with hotline numbers. "When people make this choice, they usually find a way no matter what." But he was wrong. There was something I could have done. I could have stopped Michael from ever going down to that basement level. I could have reported Timothy's disappearance to outside authorities immediately. I could have taken Michael's deterioration more seriously. The detective left me sitting alone in Michael's chaotic apartment. The body was gone, the police were gone. It was just me and the evidence of my friend's final, frantic days scattered all around me. I began gathering up the papers, reading Michael's notes more carefully. Most of them were disjointed, paranoid ramblings, but some contained information that seemed too specific, too detailed to be mere delusion. Coordinates of other facilities, names of officials connected to something called Project Afterimage, dates going back decades. In one notebook he had written, "They preserve the body but trap the consciousness." Decades of awareness without the ability to move or speak. Only the walls let them communicate. Had the voices actually told him this, or had his mind created explanations for the inexplicable horrors we'd witnessed? I would never know. Like Timothy, Michael was gone, and I was still here, still hearing occasional whispers from my heating vents and water pipes that might be nothing more than normal house sounds, or might be something far worse. I packed Michael's research into 3 large garbage bags. I couldn't leave it for the landlord or his family members to find. I couldn't risk someone else getting pulled into this nightmare. I wasn't sure whether I was going to destroy it all or continue where Michael had left off. At that moment, standing in my dead friend's apartment with the smell of his body still lingering in the air, I couldn't make that decision. What I knew for certain was that 2 of my closest friends were dead because we had ventured where we shouldn't have. And somehow, for reasons I couldn't even begin to understand, I had survived while they had not. The weight of that knowledge pressed down on me until I could barely breathe. I carried the bags to my car, looking over my shoulder, half expecting to see black SUVs watching me. The sky was bright blue. The day was moving forward as if nothing had happened, as if Michael Torres hadn't just ended his life because of what we had discovered beneath our workplace. In my car, I sat with my hands gripping the steering wheel, unable to start the engine. In 8 days, I had lost both of my friends. 8 days since we had taken that elevator down. 8 days since we had learned that some secrets should remain buried deep underground behind locked doors that whisper warnings to those foolish enough to enter. 2 weeks after Michael's funeral, I drove back to the Nevada desert. The service had been small, just me, Michael's sister who flew in from Phoenix, and a handful of former coworkers who hadn't been told the specific circumstances of his death. No one from the American Anomalous Research Agency had attended. No one had even mentioned Timothy. I didn't tell anyone where I was going. My apartment still felt charged with Michael's desperate energy. The air still felt tainted by the memory of the research papers I'd collected from his walls. Those papers now filled a locked filing cabinet in my spare bedroom, evidence of his downward spiral that I couldn't bring myself to destroy, but couldn't bear to examine. The familiar drive through the desert seemed shorter than it had during my years of employment there. The morning sun cast long shadows across the scrubland. As I turned onto the access road that led to the facility, about a mile before I would have reached the main gate, I spotted the construction vehicles. Yellow bulldozers and cranes surrounded what remained of the 5-story concrete building. The outer fence had been replaced with temporary chain-link barriers marked with demolition in progress signs. I pulled my car onto the shoulder of the access road and sat watching through my windshield. Workers in hard hats moved across the site like ants, carrying out what looked like a carefully choreographed dismantling. Half of the main building had already been reduced to rubble. The remaining portion stood with its interior exposed, floors visible like shelves in a bookcase. All of the equipment, furniture, and even the internal walls had been stripped away. I got out of my car and walked closer to the fence, staying far enough away to avoid attracting attention. Heat rose from the desert floor as I studied what remained of my workplace. The east wing, where our fateful elevator had been located, was completely gone. Nothing remained but concrete dust and twisted rebar. A construction worker passed close to my position, carrying a clipboard. "Excuse me," I called out. "What's happening to the underground levels?" He looked up, squinting at me through the chain link. "What underground levels?" "Below the main building," I said. "There are several floors beneath ground level." He shook his head. "Not according to our plans, just the main structure and foundation." He looked at me more carefully. "You worked here or something?" I nodded. "For 3 years. Government stuff, right?" he asked, lowering his voice slightly. "Got the contract last week." "Rush job. They're paying triple for us to have this place gone by the end of the month." "What about the contents?" I asked. "Computers, equipment, files, all cleared out before we got here," he said. "Place was empty, like they just walked away and locked the doors." He checked his watch. "Better get back to it. Supervisors are strict about breaks." As he walked away, I stared at the demolition site. Were they simply removing all evidence of the above-ground facility while sealing the underground chambers? Or had the preserved bodies and whatever machinery maintained them already been relocated to another site? I stood there for nearly an hour, watching the systematic destruction of a building that had never revealed its true purpose to those who worked inside it. Eventually, a security guard noticed me and began walking toward the fence. I returned to my car and drove away before he could ask any questions. Back in my apartment, I opened my laptop and began searching government databases. During my 3 years with the AR, I had gained access to various federal record systems for budgeting and reporting purposes. My credentials had been revoked, but I still knew the public-facing portals. Hours of searching yielded absolutely nothing. Every mention of the American Anomalous Research Agency had vanished from government websites. Budget reports that had previously listed the agency now showed different allocations. Press releases about research initiatives that I distinctly remembered mentioning the AR now attributed the same work to other departments. It was as if someone had methodically erased every single digital fingerprint of the organization's existence. The few references I found through archive pages led to dead links or redirected to unrelated government sites. The next morning, I drove to the Henderson Police Department. The officer at the desk looked incredibly bored as I explained that I wanted to file a missing person report. "Name of the missing individual?" he asked, typing slowly. "Timothy Clark. Relation to you?" "Former co-worker and friend." "When was the last time you saw Mr. Clark?" I hesitated. "About 3 weeks ago at work." "And where was this?" "We worked at a government research facility in the desert." "The American Anomalous Research Agency." The officer stopped typing and looked up at me. "Which agency?" "The American Anomalous Research Agency." It's a research division. He typed something, then frowned at his screen. No record of any such agency in our system. Which department was it under? Defense? Energy? I'm not sure, I admitted. We handled specialized research. I'll need the address of this facility and contact information for your supervisors there. I gave him the coordinates and the names of Collins and Ramirez. The officer made a call, speaking quietly into the phone while occasionally glancing over at me. After hanging up, his demeanor changed completely. Sir, we can't file a report without verifying employment. The location you've given us is listed as a decommissioned weather monitoring station that's been abandoned for years. There's no record of any Timothy Clark employed by any federal agency in this region. That's impossible, I said. I worked there for 3 years. Timothy worked there too. There were nearly 50 employees. Do you have any employment records? Pay stubs? ID badges? My ID had been taken when I was escorted out. My termination letter was carefully worded to avoid mentioning the agency name, referring only to previous employer. My digital pay stubs had vanished along with my access to the employee portal. Look, the officer said, seeing my frustration. If your friend is genuinely missing, we need verifiable information. Addresses, phone numbers, family contacts, recent photographs. Can you provide any of that? I couldn't. Timothy had been a very private person. I knew he had a sister in Phoenix, but I didn't know her name or any contact information for her. The personnel files had all been wiped from the system. Even the photos we'd taken at company events had been on my work phone, which had been confiscated. I'm sorry, the officer said, not unkindly. Without more information, there's nothing we can do. I left the police station understanding with crystal clarity exactly what had happened. Timothy hadn't just disappeared physically. He'd been erased from official existence. His records, his employment history, everything that would prove he had ever worked at the facility had been systematically removed. My former employers had proven remarkably thorough in their cleanup operation. They hadn't just demolished a building. They had erased their entire operational history, including the people who had worked there. The next week, I put my apartment up for rent, packed all of my belongings into a small U-Haul trailer. Henderson held too many memories, too many ghosts, Michael's empty apartment across town, the missing presence of Timothy, the knowledge that just beyond the city, workers were erasing the last physical evidence of what we had discovered. I chose Colorado almost at random, far enough from Nevada to feel like a fresh start, but close enough that the drive wasn't too overwhelming. Boulder offered anonymity and distance. I found a small one-bedroom apartment and sent out job applications, leveraging my accounting background while carefully omitting any mention of the RA from my resume. Within 2 weeks, I was hired by a local accounting firm that handled small business clients. The work was straightforward and mindless, exactly what I needed. I spent my days with numbers that made sense, figures that balanced, problems with clear solutions, nothing like the inexplicable horrors I had witnessed underground. But the nights were harder. Sleep came reluctantly and brought vivid dreams, endless corridors stretching into darkness, walls that whispered urgent warnings, and always the preserved bodies standing in perfect rows, their clouded eyes somehow tracking my movement through the room. Sometimes Timothy stood among them, his face waxy and immobile, but his eyes alive with recognition. Sometimes Michael hung suspended like the others, his mouth moving slightly, trying to tell me something I just couldn't understand. I would wake up gasping, certain I could hear whispers coming through my heating vents or water pipes. The sound would fade as I became fully conscious, leaving me completely unsure whether it had been real or imagined. After weeks of broken sleep and daytime exhaustion, I bought a notebook and began writing, at first just disjointed memories and impressions. The feel of the cold air rushing from the elevator when the doors opened, the exact shade of blue of the keypad light, the rhythmic pattern of the whispers. Gradually, I organized these fragments into a coherent narrative. Starting with that lunch break when Michael first proposed exploring the restricted areas, I wrote each evening after work, filling page after page with detailed descriptions of everything we had seen and experienced. I recorded the precise timeline of events, the exact layout of the underground corridors as I remembered them, the arrangement of the preserved bodies in their neat rows, the warnings from the voices in the walls, Michael's gradual unraveling, and Timothy's disappearance, the practiced efficiency with which we had been removed from the facility, and the subsequent erasure of all evidence. The writing process was painful, but ultimately necessary. Each session left me drained, but somehow also lighter, as if transferring the memories to paper reduced their weight in my mind. I wasn't writing for publication, or even for others to read. This was partly therapy and partly documentation of events that I fear might otherwise start to seem like delusions if I ever began to doubt my own memories. As the months passed, the nightmares came less frequently. The whispers faded from my pipes and vents, though occasionally I still thought I heard them in the moments between waking and sleeping. My life in Boulder developed its own routine, work, occasional hikes in the nearby mountains, quiet evenings at home with books or streaming services. I made a few friends and dated occasionally, but I kept everyone at a careful distance. How could I possibly explain what had happened? What had changed me? The weight of secrets created an invisible barrier between myself and others. My notebook eventually became 3, then 5, then a dozen. I bought a fireproof safe to store them in, completely unsure whether I was protecting them from accidental destruction or actively preventing others from reading them. Perhaps it was both. In my final notebook, I wrote directly to some imagined future reader, perhaps someone who might find my accounts after my death, or another person who had encountered something similar and was searching for confirmation that they weren't insane. To this unknown reader, I offered the conclusions that I had reached after months of reflection. Some government agencies operate entirely outside public knowledge or oversight. Some research programs continue for decades without any real scrutiny, and some discoveries are hidden not to protect national security, but because they defy all explanation or ethical boundaries. I wrote about the terrible cost of curiosity. 2 friends dead because we couldn't resist exploring where we didn't belong. I detailed how quickly and efficiently an organization could erase not just its operational footprint, but the very existence of the people associated with it. Most importantly, I wrote a warning. If you discover abandoned research facilities, sealed doors with unusual security measures, or elevators that descend further than any building plans indicate, walk away. Report nothing. Tell no one. Return to your normal life and try your best to forget what you've seen. Because somewhere in the Nevada desert, beneath the demolished remains of a nondescript concrete building, those chambers might still exist. The preserved bodies might still stand in their perfect rows. The voices might still whisper their warnings to empty corridors. And somewhere else, perhaps in another facility, hidden underground in some remote location, Timothy might stand among new specimens, his eyes clouded but aware, his consciousness trapped in an immobile body, becoming just another voice in the walls, desperately trying to warn those who come too close to secrets that should remain buried. I closed my final notebook and locked it away with the others. Outside my apartment window, Boulder continued its normal evening rhythm. People were walking dogs, Couples were heading out to dinner. Students were returning from late classes. None of them knew what existed beneath the surface of our world. None of them had heard the whispers. And I had come to realize that this ignorance was a blessing. Because once you hear the voices in the walls, once you see what waits in those underground chambers, you can never truly escape them. You can only hope to live with the knowledge, to carry on despite it, and to warn others away from the same terrible discovery. Some curiosities are just far too dangerous to satisfy. Some doors should remain locked. Some secrets should stay buried deep underground, hidden from those who don't understand the true price of uncovering them.